This is your host, Marisol, a freedom lifestyle consultant, bringing you an episode of Roaming the Now, where expat entrepreneurs, coaches, and mentors come together to give you a behind the scenes look at the real and raw experience of what it actually means to set out to a new country and build a life abroad. Hello, and welcome to Roaming the Now. This is your host, Marisol, and today I have Juliana Barbati, who's coming to us from El Salvador. Hello.
Hi, so excited to be here.
So excited to have you in our conversation today because I feel like it's super juicy and one of the things that comes with being a nomad, living abroad, traveling abroad, that's super important. So before we jump into that, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you ended up moving to El Salvador.
Yeah, so hello again. My name is Juliana Barbati. I own a podcast management agency. I am originally from Brazil, but when I was 13 years old, my family moved to the United States, where I lived most of my life. In 2021, my husband and I decided to take a trip around the world. So we went to live in Portugal for a little while. Then we moved to Italy, and then we moved back to Florida. And, we have two little kids. So we were like, I think we're done moving around until 2022 rolled in. And my husband is a Bitcoiner. And El Salvador had made Bitcoin legal tender. So we got curious, right? I was like, well, what is this place, first of all, because we had never heard about El Salvador. And anyway, we lived in Florida. We were 2 hours away. So we were like, let's hop on a flight and just go check it out. Like, no intention of moving here. We just came for vacation. And this was May of 2022. We spent a week here. On the second day that I was here, I was like, no, there's no way. Like, we're moving to this place, even though this is not our intention. We just fell in love with the country. And then my husband, the next day, he was like, yeah, I think I'm on board. And then we went back to Florida, and we had a month and a half left on our lease. And actually, our plan prior to El Salvador was to get an RV and just live that lifestyle, because my husband and I, we like to move, but we have two littles, so we figured it'd be easier to move if we had our house in our back, and we homeschool and all the things. But anyway, we went back to Florida, sold everything, and within 2 weeks we got back to El Salvador, and we have been here 9 months by now.
Wow, what an adventure, honestly. I love that though, because that is like that's like the desire, right? Like when you're thinking about someone who wants to be in a place where you're financially free, like you're traveling, like that is like what that affords. You can pick up, like you can move anywhere either in a month's notice or like a week's notice.
Pretty much, yeah, that is it. And especially because, it's different when you have kids, right? But because we homeschool, it's different. Like, we have the flexibility, or like, let's just pick up the kids and come. And it's funny because now my kids, if we go somewhere, let's say we're going to travel somewhere, they're like, are we moving, or is this vacation? They don't know. And I'm like, oh, this is great. My kids are flexible from the get-go. They're like, as long as we're together, we have each other, my kids are fine, which I love.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that they're like little travelers already. They're ready.
Yeah,
Are we
exactly.
staying or are we just visiting? I love that.
Yeah.
So, that's so fun. I love that. Like, it's like what an adventurous like family. Everyone's
Yeah,
just
I
on
mean,
board with
I
it.
met my husband backpacking through Europe. So I guess we've always had the adventurous side to us. Even though if you ask us, like, are you guys adventurous? We would say no. But yeah, we are. We are.
I would say
So
so.
yeah.
Probably if you met a traveler meets a traveler while traveling, I'd say you're probably going to end up with a very adventurous lifestyle when you're together, right?
Yeah.
That's so fun. Okay. So I know that we had chatted and we wanted to talk about just the importance of having discernment, right? Like having discernment when you're traveling, trusting your gut feeling when you're traveling. And I know that you had wanted to speak on that. So before you jump into sharing, maybe just tell us a little bit about your experience with discernment and traveling.
Yes. So, the first time that I traveled by myself, I was actually like 25. I was getting over a really bad breakup, and I just booked a flight to France. I went to Paris, and it was the first time that I ever traveled by myself. And I loved it. It was great. I was, a new environment for me. And it was good proof that I could make it on my own because I had been in this relationship with this guy since I was 21. So, like formative years were spent with this guy. And then all of a sudden we weren't together anymore. And I was like, can I even live life without this guy, So just picking up and leaving and going to Paris was a great thing that I did for myself, like proof that yes, I could do this on my own. And it's funny because right before I left, there was a movie that had come out, and I forget the name, but it was this guy who I guess he was like a former CIA guy, and his daughters actually went to Paris, or his daughter went to Paris with a friend, and they got kidnapped. And my friend was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "It's just a movie. I'm gonna be fine." But I remember I was like walking, like this is during daytime. I was walking through Paris, and this guy comes next to me. He starts talking to me as if he knew me, and I'm like, "You got the wrong person." And he was like, "Oh, I thought you were so and so." I'm like, "No." And I just got like some bad vibes, and I'm like, "Whatever, dude." I just went inside of the record store, and I was in there for like a good 30 minutes. I come out and the guy is like waiting for me, and I'm like, "Oh, what is happening here?" I was freaking out. And I don't remember exactly what I did, but somehow I got rid of the guy. But hot tip, I traveled with my pepper spray. Like, I'm not taking chances. And pepper sprays, like, at least, I don't know nowadays, but they don't really, when you put your purse through the machine, like, it doesn't pick up because it's plastic. So I'm like, I'm just gonna take my chances. And I think it's illegal in a lot of countries. It's not like the US, but I'm like, it's my life here. So we're just gonna roll with the pepper spray. But I never needed it. But I did it. But just to show, like, if something like doesn't feel right in your gut, like listen to it. Because I think it's easy for you to be, in a different country and just start to rationalize that, oh, it's your bias, whatever. But like, no, it's your gut going off, so don't feel like it's your bias, like trust your gut because it's better to be safe than sorry, right? Especially when you're alone abroad. And for me, I was like, whatever, 25 at the time was the first time I had gone somewhere by myself.
Yeah, no, 100%. The movie you're talking about is Taken. So I actually have like a
Yes.
super funny story around that. So, one point in time I was dating someone from France and I was going to go to France. And like this was like a trip that had been like being planned for like it wasn't like for a while, but it was more so like they had to go back because of visa purposes. And I was like, well, like we're dating, like we've been dating for a while, like I want to see you. And so I remember telling my dad like I was going to I was going to Europe. And he was like, are you sure you're like not being groomed? Are you sure you're not like gonna get there and you're gonna be kidnapped? And like, I go, what movie were you watching? Like, have you been watching like too many Taken movies? Like, obviously, like just a concerned parent, right? But I just kind of thought it was so funny. I'm like, you know this person, like you've met them, like we've been dating for a while, and now all of a sudden you think that this is part of like a whole like grand scheme of like I'm being groomed to be kidnapped. Obviously, I'm still here, I'm still alive. That was not
You made it.
it was not like that. I had a really fun time, but I just thought that was funny because trip Paris, first time like
Yeah.
going to Europe alone, and it was funny because I'm sure it was that movie he had watched recently was Taken.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yes. It was that movie.
Ah, so funny. Okay. Funny how sometimes, we watch those movies, like they really just have like an influence on us, like when we're
Yeah.
traveling. That's kind of where I think it's
Yeah.
like,
I mean that, at the end of the day, a lot of these movies have some root in truth, right? Because that's how they get us to get hooked, is because there is some truth in what happens. So like, the human trafficking, especially like nowadays, human trafficking, it's not like a figment of imagination. It actually happens, right? But yeah.
yeah,
Thankfully, nothing that bad has ever happened to me.
me too. And also like I think it's so easy if we get comfortable in our bubble, right? And so we're like, oh my God, human trafficking abroad. But it's like, no, like at least, in the United States, like when I lived in the US, like human trafficking is happening in the backyard. Like human trafficking happens all over the world. It even happens in the US.
Yeah,
So
100%.
always good to put that in perspective of just like do your research before you're going to travel somewhere alone and do the things that make you feel comfortable just in case, obviously. So
Mhm.
the good tip of pepper spray is not picked up. And if it is, they just ask you to throw it away. Like that happened to me one time in the US. Like I forgot that I had it, but whatever.
Yeah, you just break down like, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't know, and whatever, like move on with life.
No, 100%. Okay, so that's a really good pro tip story of just trusting your gut and doing what you need to do to get yourself back to safety. What do you think gets in the way, like really, of people like trusting themselves to go abroad to practice that discernment? And like, what do you think is like some telltale signs that like people tend to ignore before things go wrong?
I think in your gut that something's off, right? Like I'm hyper vigilant all the time, but it's easy for me to start thinking, oh, I'm just overthinking, oh, this, like I'm just going crazy, right? Because society has taught me that I'm like a crazy person who just overthinks everything. So like the minute that you have like this dialogue back and forth with yourself, actually take time to pause and understand, like, am I making this stuff up or is there something off here? And like literally do take the time. Like let's say you're walking down the street and like something doesn't feel right. Go into a store, like just get inside of a safe place, a place where you're like, okay, I'm okay here. There are people around. If something happens, I can start screaming and somebody will come for help. But don't let go of those things. Ever since moving here to El Salvador, there have been things that happened to our family that, hindsight 2020, right? Like we knew that the things were off, but my husband and I started rationalizing, like, no, it's fine, everything's okay. Like we're just overthinking these things. And then lo and behold, something happens later down the line, like for example, when my husband and I moved to El Salvador, I had been wanting to do ayahuasca for a very long time. And one of the first things that I did was like, let me see if ayahuasca is legal here in El Salvador. And I found a group that did it and I was so excited. And I was the only person there. I was like one of a few people there who were who were expats. So then after the ceremony, the guy who organized the ceremony, he somehow got a hold of me and, we became like quote unquote friends. And next thing we know, he was like, we have this mission to grow ayahuasca and this and that and the other, but we need money. And next thing you know, my husband lent this guy $1,000, and a month later he like disappeared. And it was this whole big deal when we filed like a police, like we went to the police department and filed a complaint and all those things. But the point is, first of all, understand where you are. Like $1,000 in like Central America is a lot of money, right? So like again, hindsight 2020, like we should have thought about that, especially when people here on average make $20 a day. If you give somebody 1,000, that's a lot of money. Number two, like having a contract in place and things like that, just to not put yourself in that kind of situation, right? Number three, like I knew something was off. Like the first time that he came over my house, I was thinking to myself, like, man, like he's seen my house, right? And in my house, I live in a fancy house. So automatically people think like, oh man, she's rich, right? But like, no, it just so happens that I make money in the United States. So it's easy for me to leverage that here, right? So I thought that to myself, like, oh man, like he thinks I'm rich and he's gonna ask for money. And then lo and behold, he did ask for money, but he was very manipulative in how he did it. So my husband and I fell for it. By the way, my husband and I consider ourselves very smart people, and he still was able to manipulate us, right? So just being aware of those things. And then like looking at people's behavior, right? Like take time. If somebody comes to you and let's say they put you in the same situation where they're asking you for money, like just instead of saying yes right away, just take time, observe, see how do they handle money, right? Like, do they work? Things like that, because we have, for example, lend money to the lady who cleans and who cooks and cleans in our house, but like we trust her. We have been with her for a very long time. So that's not to say that you cannot do it, that you cannot help people out. But for example, like she asked us for $100 and she said, can you take out 50 out of my next two paychecks? So it was just a different situation. And she had already like proven herself to us versus this guy who took advantage that we had just left ayahuasca. We had this ayahuasca high, like everything's beautiful and like amazing. So he definitely knew what he was doing.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's like super important to know because um it's just like if you're in a different culture, right? You're in a different culture. And like if you're a US citizen, like, oh, $1,000 is not a lot in the United States, but really $1,000 goes very far in like where I am, it goes very far in Mexico, and it goes very far in other parts of, I mean, honestly, all over the world, like it goes very far. And I think also just, as you said, like not rationalizing, like that's so important, because every time I've rationalized something, it wasn't that serious, but every time I've like rationalized something, like when the time comes, something goes south, and I'm like, dang it, like why did this happen? I'm like, oh, it's because I rationalized it. Like I didn't just
Yeah.
listen to myself, which I think is really important, especially like, I mean, similar to you, like where I live, is considered like a rich area. To me, like it's, again, I'm from the US, like this is not considered rich, but I'm very, very mindful of like, who do I allow to see that I live here, right? Who do I invite over? Because like, I'm not saying that I'm distrustful, it's just like discernment in like, have I met you a couple times? Do I know you? Or do you know someone who, lives here? Stuff like that. Because when people think you have money abroad, and as Americans, you do, right? People do try to take advantage of it. That's why I always say when I lived in Mexico City, I was like I feel like quiet, and I always like dressed down because I lived in an area that was very like ritzy. And I just tried to blend in as much as possible, because it really is like people are out here like trying to survive. And that creates a very
Yes.
like kind of like ruthless mindset that I've noticed with the things that they'll do if they feel they can manipulate, or like they can take advantage of you. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I have to say, like, El Salvador in general is a very safe country. Like, the president here has been like doing a lot of work to make sure that he keeps the country safe. And even if you ask locals, they'll tell you the difference between 2 years ago and now. Like, a few years ago, you could not leave your house. Like, people were just like, kids would go to school, come back home and lock the doors, and that's it. Like, nobody leaves, So that has changed. So what has happened now is because the president has been cleaning up the country, people are like, quote unquote, forced to do like those petty crimes of, like scamming people and things like that. So scamming rates are up as far as we know, and I don't have statistics on this, but like from what we know is like scammers are like on the hunt, right? Because they need to make money some way, somehow. And for them, like getting a job is not it. So you just have, again, like always have that discernment for people and who you're dealing with, and understanding that, like you said, $1,000 in most places of the world it's a lot of money. Even in Europe, like when we spend time in Italy, I remember my mother-in-law saying something about like she was gonna have to get her car checked and it was gonna be $20, and it was so much fun. And I'm like, $20, like that's crazy, like because you're comparing to the United States, right, where you would never find somebody to check your car for $20. So just know that $1,000 is a lot of money anywhere you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm sure probably you've experienced this, right? It's so, because especially when you're still making a living earning US dollars while you're abroad. Um, I was talking to my dad about this because I just filed taxes, and I was like, it's interesting. Like I live in Mexico, and I live in an area where it's very affordable to live off the US dollar. Like, I leverage it a lot, but I still think in a US consciousness around money. Do you experience that too?
Yeah, totally, 100%.
Yeah. So it's interesting to kind of be in that space where like you are, like I still pay, like I pay my taxes in America. Like I do the normal things an American citizen needs to do. However, I do not live in that way. So it's kind of a weird thing to operate from this paradigm of like economically, my brain is my brain's operating from that economy consciousness, but then I'm like super aware that where I live, like that's not the normal case. And sometimes like where I live, it is very much so it's not the case, because there are people who charge like 15 pesos for something, which is like not even a dollar. And it's like something they probably spent like 10 minutes like hand weaving, but like they price that at 15 pesos, you know? Like
Yeah,
it's
totally.
very,
My husband is really good at understanding though, like how rates work. My husband just has a very mathematical brain. So for me, like let's say, somebody's charging $10 for something. I'll be like, oh man, that's cheap. My husband like, no, like think about this. And he'll be breaking down the math. I'm like, oh, okay, like that became expensive because I'm comparing to the United States, right? So yeah, my husband is very good about comparing rates and why something's expensive, even though to us it'd be like, nah, it's just $10, but he's very good at showing why it's not like that. And also the importance of making sure that as expats, right? Like there is something called the gringo tax, which people know you're not from there and they'll overcharge you. So you have to be aware of that too.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me, and then I walked away, and then they just lowered the price as I walk away. I remember like by 20 pesos every time, every step I took and got further, they lowered the price until they finally got to the actual price of the item, and I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. That there's no way your metal spoon is worth that much.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, my husband is really good about negotiating things because you have to, because otherwise people just assume again, assuming that you're rich, right? And at the end of the day, if you're gonna leave the United States or wherever you are to go somewhere else because you're trying to save money, the point is to save money, right? Like you don't want to pay. Like I'll give you an example. One time I booked a facial and I asked the lady on over the phone, like, how much was the facial? She said, oh, we do like a skin assessment before and we'll give you the treatment plan. So we'll let you know when you come here. I'm like, okay, sure. In my mind, it was going to be like whatever, $30 because I go to a dermatologist and the dermatologist charges me $20. So then I go to this place and I walk in. The lady was like, oh, it's going to be $150. And I'm like, first of all, you didn't even do my skin assessment. Second of all, like, are you insane? Like the dermatologist charged 20 and here you are charging 150. So I'm like, thank you so much. I don't have cash on me to pay for this. So I'm just gonna have to cancel my appointment. She was like, okay, I'll give you a 50% discount. And I'm like, no, that's okay. Thank you. And I'm like, I'm never coming back to this business again, you know? So be okay with like asking people like what the price is and negotiating because I would say the most parts of the world, negotiation is part of what you do. And I think as Americans, we're like, we don't negotiate like ever, but in other cultures, it's okay. It's required actually that you negotiate, right? So don't be afraid to ask for prices. It's not rude and negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice, and that is very true. Like when you're thinking about just buying daily things in the market, like there are people who, if they feel it's overpriced, even from here, they negotiate because it's true. Like people will try to like that's kind of ridiculous. So I mean, I would have said the same thing too. I would have been like, yeah, let me just like cancel that because that's like way too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, don't be afraid, right? Because you might feel like, oh man, I'm embarrassed. I don't like what are people going to say? I'm like, I don't care what people are going to say. I'm not spending this much money for a facial. Like, I'm sorry, but those are US prices. Like, what are you putting in my face that would make it cost that much money, you know?
That's super valid, but that's a lot. I mean, I haven't experienced anything on like that level since being here. I mean, I've experienced things where they're like, tell me it's $10. I'm like, is it really $10? And then, like negotiating down to the closer price where like when the conversion of pesos, it's like $3 or $4, but still like $10 can get you like a lot here. Um, and there's even just like from like experiences of like, there's this place here that like they have pizza and she charges like I think 200 something pesos for pizza, which is equivalent to like 10-15 bucks. Obviously in the US it's cheap, right? And obviously like it's handmade and stuff. But I do kind of think, well, like she's kind of expensive for here because most people charge like you go somewhere else, it's not pizza. It's like $3 per person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just having that awareness and always just in my mind, I'm always kind of doing the conversion because it may sound cheaper, but when you actually do the conversion, you're like, well, wait, no, that's actually not not the case.
Yeah, totally. Because it's different when you're on vacation, right? And you know you're going to spend a couple grand on your vacation. But when you live there and you're always overpaying for things, it adds up and it adds up very quickly. And then my husband, again, he likes to do the percentage of like, this is 20% more than this. And like he goes into like, he gets very mathematical. So it's helpful to just have that perspective too. You know, for me, I'll be like, just always swiping my card left and right. But my husband's like, hold on, like it's not so fast.
Yeah. No, the more longer I've been here, the more I pay attention to the conversion rate. And I pay attention to like, okay, normal market rate on a normal day. Like for example, things are more expensive on the weekends than if you were to go buy it like during the week at the market. And I mean, luckily where I am, it is a small community. So they see you and they know you and they know you live here. So because they see us and recognize this, like I don't get taxed. But when we were first going to the market and stuff, like that was when that happened. Like people were just like, oh, they're not from here. And so they're like, let's just charge them more because I mean, I guess it's like it's their way of making a living.
Yeah, right. And like all they can do is try, right? Like, so just know that they're gonna try, you know? And I feel like a lot of people are like, oh man, like I'm supporting the economy, but like, no, you're just teaching them to overcharge the gringos. And like, is that really okay? You know?
Right. Yeah, I know. There's such duality around it. But when people actually live here, it's when people actually live in the place that you're going to visit and they realize that they can overcharge you. And actually, I was talking to someone earlier who they were leaving the hotel to go to the same place. She spoke Spanish and negotiated. He didn't. She paid $40 for her cab ride and he paid $90.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, and she was like, "What happened?" It's because people get nervous and they get like floundered. So I think this is actually a really good opportunity to just remind everyone when you're traveling, if you feel something is overpriced or you feel like something is like way more than it should be, assert your boundaries, use your knowledge. Yes, you're in a foreign country, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for people to take advantage of you for the same ride, same place, like literally a $50 difference. That's not really, if we're thinking about ethicalness, that's not ethical.
Right,
And if you know that,
exactly.
then speak up to it, right?
Yeah, especially because like in the situation, like why would you want to choose to ride with the person who's charging more, who's obviously unethical? Like, do you trust that person to take care of you, to drive you around town, right? So like I think that just breaks your trust from the get-go, and it's something that you need to pay attention to and listen to. Like if this person's lying to you from your very first interaction, trying to get more money out of you, take advantage of you, like have those boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have a very good point. Like if someone's gonna scam me and charge me like more than almost 50% than the actual cost, like do I trust them to drive me around? Probably not. So
Yeah.
really just practicing discernment, going full circle back to where we started. I know like you and your family have a unique situation, being that both you and your husband are like fully, financially independent. You can move wherever you want to, your kids are homeschooled. So what advice would you give to anyone who wants to make that transition to like with their family or is thinking about that? Like what would you share with them?
Well, I would say that, for my husband and I, it's been a fairly simple transition because even when we lived in Florida and we were in our little bubble, we moved around a lot, so we have lived all the way from South Florida to North Florida. So for us, it was easy. I feel like a lot of people who move abroad, they miss their families, they get homesick. For me, I'm like, I miss kombucha. Like that's what I miss. Like my mom can hop on a flight and just be here within 2 hours. And it's probably a good thing that we have a little bit of a distance, honestly. So for me, I never had to worry about that. But I would say, like, if you're preparing yourself for that, obviously, make sure that your job can support you and have some plans in place, but stay flexible at the same time because things will change, things are going to come up. And it's not a sign that you need to move back, that this was a bad decision to make. You're going to have challenges. So expect the challenge and also have no expectations, right? Because like let's say you hear me talk about El Salvador and you're like, man, I love El Salvador, I'm going there, but you have never been here. If you have these expectations of El Salvador being paradise, but your definition of paradise is different than mine, you're going to be very disappointed. So for me, I love this place, I love this country, I love the people here. To me, it truly is paradise. But if for you paradise is like Paris, like you're not going to like it here, so be open-minded and take in the culture, like there are things you're going to love, there are things you're going to hate. Like for me, it's really difficult to understand how people here in El Salvador are like on a different time dimension where you make an appointment for 10 in the morning and then noon they're like, yeah, I'm not going to make it today. And I'm like, couldn't you have told me that like 2 hours ago? But it happens here, traffic is really bad, but just again, like come with no expectations, just come with an open mind and stay flexible. That is going to be super important for you to thrive abroad anywhere that you go.
Yes, definitely. I can agree with you with the timing. That just happened to me this weekend, but I really learned to roll with it. So I made an appointment to get my hair cut at 1:30. They said, yeah, I have time for you at 1:30. I get there at 1:30. There's two people that still need to have their haircut. And I was definitely, my hair wasn't cut until like 2. So I was just
Yeah.
sitting, hanging out, watching the like 80s MTV like music they had playing. I don't even know, but it was fine. It was so different because it's so difficult. And this is just like a fun story to share. It's difficult sometimes to find like a good hairstylist, like, or someone who does hair. And South America, Mexico, because the education and everything is very different. Luckily, I had a cousin who recommended me to this person, and he's like gone to the US and trained and like done that. But it's still like you're gonna deal with that. Yeah, be here at 1:30, and then they don't get to you until like 2:15, because that's just how it
Yeah.
rolls here. But even the whole thing of like, oh yeah, I'm coming tomorrow, and then it's tomorrow 7 p.m. and they're not here and they didn't say anything, and then you have to be like, oh hey, are you coming? But like you have to be very nice around about it, because this is just how the culture is. Like it's very,
Yeah. Yeah,
very
because
like,
yeah, culturally nobody cares, right? Like for them it's fine, right? And for example, people here don't mind driving 2 hours. Like let's say you bought something on Facebook Marketplace, like the person that you bought that thing from does not mind driving 2 hours. But like for me, that's like I would just go to the store and buy a new one. It does not make sense, drive 15 minutes up the street, but people here don't mind. So I think you also have to understand people's values too. Like for me, like here, it seems like they don't value time, or not that they don't value time, but they have a different understanding of time, right? For them, it's more flexible, it's more go with the flow. For me, it's like, like regimented, like I know exactly what I'm doing at this time of the day. And I love me a schedule, so just understanding how the culture operates, and honestly, you're not going to know until your boots on the ground, because everybody's perspective is different, so which is why I'm saying you have to stay flexible and open to what's to come, because if you just have this really tight expectations, you're going to be disappointed.
yeah. Yeah, being open-minded, open expectations. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story, Juliana, and just your perspective. I feel like this is a really valuable perspective that we don't get to talk about too much. Everyone really focuses on the exciting adventure of travel, but we don't really talk about the actual realities of what is it like to travel abroad? What is it like to actually settle in an environment that people know you're not actually from? Really important conversation that I feel like I'm taking away. Enforce your boundaries. If you know something's off, follow that and don't be afraid to voice it. Yes, you may be a foreigner for a point of time, or you might be a foreigner forever, especially in those cases you're a foreigner forever. Really just don't be afraid to speak up and be like, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. So with that note, if anyone wanted to get in contact with you, what is the best way to connect with you?
So I actually have a podcast myself. My podcast is called Organic Marketing Simplified. So if anybody here owns an online business and you want to jam out with me, that's where you can find me. Otherwise, if you just want to like chat with me, ask me some questions about living abroad, I am not currently on social media, so you can find me on Facebook, Juliana Barbati, and we can just connect there. You can send me a DM and we'll chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'll make sure to add any of your links that you want to include in the description. So thank you everyone for tuning in. This is your host, Marisol, signing off. Until next time, enjoy living in the present moment, roaming the now wherever you are in the world. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Until next time, make sure you check out the links in the description. You can join my newsletters where I send you tips and tricks on how to build a lifestyle of freedom. So until our next episode, have fun, live in the present moment, and enjoy roaming the now wherever you are in the world.